What do you do with an introduction like that? We're in trouble. Lower expectations.
Who would like a book they don't want to read? We will print it. We are humbled and honored to be with you today. What a wonderful... How many enjoyed the session last night? We spent the night thinking about it and talking about it. And I love the theme. We love the theme of this conference. You may not know the theme. The theme is your faith work journey. I want to tweak it a little bit. I want to change it a little bit. Our faith and work journey doesn't happen without God. So it's not your journey, it's our journey with God. So how do we create a journey with God? And we want to share with you some of the lessons we've learned and the things we've done. Let's start at the very beginning. Adam and Eve, the great story. Adam and Eve went to the Garden of Eden. They made a mistake. They partook of the forbidden fruit. God came down and said to Adam and Eve, "Where art thou?" For my first 50 years, actually 60 years until Wendy taught me this last year, I thought Adam is hiding behind a bush or behind a rock. And God's saying, "Where art thou? Show yourself." Then it hit us. God can see behind a bush. God can see behind a rock. Adam, you're not hiding from me. So what's the question about? Here's what I think the question is about. Adam, where art thou in your work faith journey? You made a mistake. You partook of the forbidden fruit. Are you with me or are you against me? Part of our ability to let God join us in our work faith journey, or faith work, I got it backwards, is being open with God, being transparent. Why do I say that? We're going to start today's session with a test, and it's a test of openness. So if you can find a sheet of paper, if you can find a technology to take notes, it's not an easy test, and we'll see how you do. If you're sitting by your spouse, you may not want to plagiarize because your spouse will probably give your answer for you. So get ready. We're going to go quick. Here's your test. It's our faith work journey. I'm feeling very busy, but not always fulfilled. It's a yes or no. I have missed a key family activity because of work. I have missed a key work opportunity because of family. My health is deteriorating due to the diet, sleep, or exercise. My spouse and I are often more like roommates than beloved. My kids struggle, or I feel I've lost the thread with them. Just a yes or a no. When we were married, we thought we knew how things would go with our work and family, but they've not quite gone that way. I know my faith community matters, but it's really hard to find the time. I'm sometimes torn by the demands for my time and attention. So how'd you do? By the way, we were told that Greg and Shelley had no checks. They were 100% perfect. That was a joke. Notice Shelley's not here to give Greg his score. These are our struggles. These are the things many of us as CEOs and business leaders struggle with in our work life journey and work faith journey. We want to give you some ideas. One big idea. By the way, did anybody get more than 7? Anybody willing to share? Oh, yes, here you go. Could you take this book to that person? This is a book we wrote. Here you go. If you got more than 7, raise your hands. We hope there's 2 of you. Oh, yes, we got 2 book. What was that? If you answer 7 yeses.
If you answer 7 yeses, we're feeling really sorry.
We're feeling sorry for you, so we're giving you a book.
We're giving you free stuff.
By the way, like the other books, you won't read them, but it's a book. What? Who's their chair? Good. Okay. Sir, could you, or ma'am, could you go give this book to someone else? By the way, just look at somebody who's texting or feeling lonely and give them the book. Anyone else who wants a copy of the book, we're happy to share. We start with the problem. How can we help allow God to join us in our faith and work journey if we're not honest with ourselves?
So we have good reasons to be to be experts in this field because we are so stylish. That's why you should listen to us. Anybody else have a blue tuxedo when they got married? Yes, you have a friend back there.
My suggestion is never share that with anybody.
Yeah.
Did you have the mustache?
The mustache too?
No.
No. I want you to know when Michael came in last night, we were behind him in his Bermuda shorts, and Dave was just salivating. He was so excited that maybe that was back in style, that you could wear Bermuda shorts anywhere. Of course, Dave's Bermuda shorts look more like really, really wrinkled cargo pants shorts, that have a very different look. Also, you should listen to us because our kids were so happy to be with us. In case you missed this look. Very, very happy to be with us. We weren't always so happy to be with them either, so it was okay. But we have the solution, and it looks sort of like this. In other words, we don't have the solution, and it still looks sort of like this. These are Dave's books. These are a small portion, actually, of Dave's books. And this is just to let you know that I truly understand what it is like to be married to a workaholic. I get it. And these are some books that I've written in the last few years. I started writing a lot later than he did. But what I really want to say to you is what we've learned when people ask us, how did you guys do this? How did you get through this? The answer is you muddle through. That's it. You just muddle through. You see the big cloud and the hurricane coming, and you just keep driving. So we don't have any magic solutions for this challenge of how do we balance all of these different issues in our lives. But we hope that maybe we can talk about a few of them. I want to start by thanking those of you who are in the workplace at a very personal level. The world I get to live in is a better place because of the work you do. And I feel that very sincerely. All of the great work that is done by government agencies and educational agencies and even churches and charities and all of those good things probably don't together do what you do in creating jobs and supporting families throughout this world that we live in. But I also want to thank the spouses of those of you who do that hard work, because you support your families, but your families support you. And we get that. We get that. And thank you all for the work that you do.
If you notice the difference in books, my books are about business and greed. Wendy's books, temple experience, forgiving ourselves, weakness, habits of happiness, and the most recent book, Let God Love You. So it's great for me to be here so that she will carry me to the eternities. I study leadership. We have one major message we're going to give you as CEOs today, and we have 4 suggestions to implement the message. People want to know the magic elixir. What makes a great leader? How many here are delighted that it is not intellectual ability? If you didn't understand the question, raise your hand. So what is it? It's not intellect that causes us to be a great leader. What is it? What was that? Character. Who else would give an answer? What is it that causes this? Your heart, your character. The word that gets used a lot, and yes, it's true, is emotional intelligence. Well, as someone who studies leadership and thinks about it and studies it, emotional intelligence is a key. Do I have character? Do I have heart? Do people believe me? Am I authentic? But what we've discovered is that it's not just emotional intelligence. From the mid-90s through about 2005, we studied that. Now what we're beginning to recognize is it's learning, it's agility, it's grit. 0 to 10, go like this. This is 10. How fast is your business changing? How fast is your business changing? 0 to 10. Let's get a scale. 0 to 10. How fast is your business changing? By the way, this is really cool. Could you stand up, sir? Stand up. Give me an average. Just 0 to 10. Give me an average. Just look out the room. The average is 9.5. So tell me 9.5. There it is. This is how we do our statistics. How good am I as a leader at learning? resilience, growth, taking risk. And that was popular from about 2005 till the last year. Here's what we're finding in the last year. We just did a study. 4,000 people filled out a self-assessment, 28,000 people filled it out on them. What set of skills do you need to drive results? And the number one set of skills was to navigate paradox. What's a paradox?
Paradox. Who's got a great definition for that? Paradox, as we're defining it, is two things that look like opposites, but that both have truth in them, that both have to be done at the same time. You can't just choose between them and find your way. You've got to find a way for both of those things, even though they look like they don't belong together.
And here's the myths.
There's a solution to these conflicting demands if only I can manage or find it. Do you ever feel that way sometimes? And we're going to kind of propose that we don't solve paradox. We have to navigate it. It's like we're going through a straight and narrow way. We've got guardrails on both sides, and we're trying to find the path down the middle. Sometimes we think if I simply discover God's purpose or mission for my life, that all those challenges will be resolved, and I'm just waiting for direction. But as Michael reminded us last night, even when you've got your clear sense of this is what I'm trying to do, you can end up pounding on the steering wheel saying, why is this so hard? So a lot of times, even when we do have, when we are looking, we do have direction, we have a hard time. But a lot of times, God doesn't just tell us what the answer is. He leaves it to us. He's looking to us to figure out what do we want, what matters to us. There are lots of ways, perhaps, that we could find that solution. Sometimes we wish if we just would grow up, somehow this would get simpler. Did you ever feel like that when you were about 20? Are you still feeling that a little bit later in your life? It doesn't work, does it? We just keep coming up with these same issues over and over again.
You know, this faith work journey is a journey, not a destination. How do we navigate the inherent paradoxes that are part of that journey? And what we're finding is leaders who do that. By the way, you have to have heart, you have to have character, you have to have authenticity, you have to have morality, you have to change, you have to adapt, you have to learn. But once you've got those, do I navigate the tensions of life? Am I willing to have tension without contention? Am I willing to disagree without being disagreeable? Am I willing to work with my employees? And what's fascinating is those paradoxes exist. In our research, here's some we see, but you saw them last night so beautifully. In every one of Michael Belk's pictures, was there a paradox? Was there a tension? Which picture grabbed your attention that had a tension in it? The Nazi. How many saw that Nazi picture and at first, oh, I'm taken back. By the way, what a powerful message. It's not 1 times 1 equals 10, it's 1 times 1 equals 11. That's the way our granddaughter adds numbers. It's a beautiful paradox of Christ demonstrating love and service in the worst of all settings. Any other pictures capture his paradox? Carrying the coffin with coins and the Savior in the background. The resurrection, the love, the hope of the future in the face of death. Every one of his pictures had this paradox. Then Greg gave a talk. How many had not heard of, I've got his first name wrong again, Humphrey Monmouth? How many had not heard of Humphrey Monmouth? By the way, this session's done. That story alone is worth the experience. Look at the incredible paradox with money and meaning. Here's a man with money, here's a man with meaning, both of whom give themselves to Christ. And together they navigate a paradox. And then we had a session, what would Jesus teach? Notice the 3 insights that Randy shared. Servant, leader. That's a paradox. The leader should also be a developer and a disciplinarian. That's a paradox. The leader should be boss. He should be employee or she should be employee. The things I put on the board, those are the paradoxes we as leaders have to navigate. By the way, we argue you don't manage them. Manage means it's over. How many had kids when they left? How many of you had kids who left home? How many of you thought, oh, they're out of the house. I'm done. My parenting job is over. Anyone have that fantasy? How long did it last? About a day. Now it's not, did I make the drill team at age 15? It's, my partner's not working right. I'm struggling with a career. These are big issues, and those paradoxes don't go away. So how do I in the middle, and by the way, if I were doing this slide over again, it would be me with God, because I think the slide is wrong. It's not me alone. This faith life journey last night is about me with my Redeemer, my God. How do I manage these tensions? Is there ever a tension between spouse and work? Have any of you felt that tension?
He has felt this tension.
Is there ever a tension between friendship and kids, between personal and faith? These tensions are real. They exist. One of the things I hope our message is today, here's the mega message. Don't hide, Adam, where art thou? Don't hide from the paradoxes of our life. Run into them. Face them. God will join us in our faith work journey if we can manage those paradoxes. If not, do any of these represent your spouse? No, that was a joke. I won't say that. Burned out, helped, overwhelmed. And the Savior created in his work paradox. I'm really grateful you showed the Tyndale Bible. I tend to use the King James Version, so this may not be your translation. But look at the messages of the Savior of the world. In Matthew, God commanded, thou shalt honor thy father and thy mother. In Luke, if any man come to me and hate not his father and his mother and his wife and children, they cannot be my disciple. What a fascinating paradox. Matthew, this great Sermon on the Mount. Let your light so shine before men that they see your good works. Further in the same sermon, when thou doest alms, let not the left hand know what the right hand doeth. Notice the paradox. Luke, and the Lord said unto him, now do ye Pharisees make clean the outside of the cup and the platter, but the inward part is full of ravening, the hypocrisy of the Pharisees. In John, the works I do in my Father's name bear witness. And last night Randy quoted this, and it's a marvelous verse. Matthew 23, he that is the greatest shall be your servant. Whosoever shall exalt himself shall be abased, and he that shall humble shall be exalted. So what do we think you need in navigating paradoxes? Here's the message. I'm a CEO. I gotta navigate paradox. I think we need guardrails. Guardrails. Guardrails tell us where we can go. Let's take the paradox with money and meaning. If we only focus on money and we're not managing the other guardrail, is there going to be a hole in our lives? Absolutely. How many have seen the movie Greed? How many of you have met somebody whose real life focus is making money? What happens as they mature? What happens as they grow? This is Greed is Good movie. They get a picture of Michael Douglas as the Gordon Gekko, and they put it in their bedroom at night. Horrible. What if we only focus on meaning and never worry about money? That story last night was so powerful. I love Tyndale. I think Tyndale is one of the greatest reformers who created the gospel that could go to all people in English. Had he not had Monmouth, did I say that wrong? Had he not had his money person, it wouldn't have happened. So our dear friends, the CEOs, how do I find the guardrails to navigate these paradoxes? We have 4 tips. Number 1, it's about relationships. Number 2, it's about expectations. Number 3, it's about day-to-day routines. And number 4, it's about a focus of who we are. Let us give you our tips.
I want to talk for a few minutes this morning about the stages of long-term committed relationships. Because one of the paradoxes is that when we are trying to have long-term commitment in our relationships, whether it's with a spouse, with our children, with a work environment, or even with God, sometimes we have to go through hard times to get to good times. Sometimes we go through periods of distancing before we get to stages of real acceptance and really finding our way. So there's a paradox that answers the question of paradox, if you will. The first stage, maybe this will be familiar to you if you're married or if you've been in a loving relationship, is the honeymoon stage. And the honeymoon stage is just this, this is the answer to the problems of my life. I finally found the person who sees life the way I do. We will not have the problems other people had. We will not be like our parents. We will get along. Everything will be fine and rosy and lovely. The next stage is, however, a little more difficult. The honeymoon stage lasts for maybe weeks, maybe months, maybe years. But eventually we start to find ourselves in sort of a power struggle. The power struggle stage sort of looks like you're not meeting my needs and you're doing it on purpose. Why did I marry this person? I thought we were so much alike, and now I'm finding all these. He doesn't even know when to take the garbage out. She doesn't even know how much orange juice to give me for breakfast. We have these little struggles and problems that come up, and we get frustrated. We wonder why we chose this. Any of you find yourself, well, no, we won't ask you to raise hands, I guess. My parents lasted in the honeymoon stage about 3 hours, I think, and they spent the rest of the 85 years of their lives in the power struggle. So some of us can kind of get stuck there. But a lot of us will find that over time we move into kind of a distancing or withdrawal stage where we sort of say, you know what? I'm sick of fighting about this. I'm tired of struggling with this issue. I don't know what this is like. I don't know what you had in mind, God, but this is not working for me. I don't know what you had in mind, employer, career. I don't know why I chose to do this. This is not fun. This is not helping. I'm wondering if I should get out. And in fact, this is the most dangerous stage for marriages, if you happen to be in a marriage. But we see this in our relationships with our kids as well, don't we? Where they or we kind of say, I'm done. I'm out of here. And then if we hang on, if we keep going, if we keep listening, if we keep apologizing, if we keep looking at our own issues instead of blaming our spouse or our employer or the heavens, we get to a stage of renewal and acceptance. How many of you have gotten to a place in your relationship with the Lord where you kind of say, you know what, you know more than I do, and whatever you want to do with my life is fine by me? And we can get to that kind of a place in other things as well, where we say to our spouse, you know, whatever you're like in your life, I understand now. And I accept you for the wonderful human being that's beneath all of these things that I don't necessarily agree with. So some skills for committed relationships. We'll just hit a couple of these. In the honeymoon stage, we want to just enjoy the dream, build on the positive. I read a book recently called Be So Good They Can't Ignore You, and I loved it as a recommendation. It was about a book about work and jobs, and it was a book for young adults. It said, stop worrying so much about what your passion is. Stop worrying so much about finding some big dream. Just get so good at what you do that they can't ignore you. And then opportunities will open up, and you will become passionate about what you do, because you've learned the skills that make it enjoyable and fun. In the power struggle stage, we went into things like defensiveness and contempt and stonewalling, which means sort of, I don't want to talk about it. Criticism. When we look at marital research, those four qualities, defensiveness, criticism, contempt, and stonewalling, predict with a 91% accuracy who will still be married in 5 years and who will not. The more of those four things we've got going in our lives, the worse our odds are. Any of those possibly resonate for anybody as something you do? So it's a little scary to realize we have to work on ourselves on those four things. We need to learn the skills of effective apologies and forgiving. Praise and success. Dave is exceptionally good at this. He's just wonderful. When you walk in the door, he's like, tell me about it. That's so exciting. What happened next? And it turns out that celebrating success is a really positive way to build good things in our lives. You may have also noticed he has a sense of humor. And that's a really positive thing in the power struggle, to say, how can I use this conflict to strengthen the relationship with this person? How can I use the conflict to convince them I'm listening and I'm on their side? I really worked this issue with one of my children for years. She'd come in, she wanted to argue as a teenager about every rule, about every thing that we were trying to get her to learn to do well in her life. And I had to learn over a 10-year period to just constantly be saying, let me make sure I've got this. So you think A, B, C, and D. Have I got that right? No, Mom, it's not like that at all. I think this, and this. Okay, let me make sure. So you think this, and this. Have I got that right? Well, yeah, I guess. Is there anything else? Yeah, this, and this. Okay, let me make sure I've got it. So you think this, and now this. Have I got it right? Yeah. And you'd feel the anxiety and the tension and the anger just sort of come down in the room, and then we could begin to talk. I had the most interesting experience with her. She's now a grown woman with 2 young children and a mother-in-law who's a little hard on her sometimes. And I was having a difficult exchange with this particular mother-in-law, and Monica was handling it beautifully. I shouldn't have said this because this is being taped, isn't it? Don't tell. And I turned to her afterwards, I said, how have you learned to do this? She's a sociology professor, and she really works this issue. And she says, well, I've learned that what you have to do when you have a disagreement with people is you just have to repeat back to them, this is what I understand you're saying. Have I got that right? Is there anything else? And I thought, she doesn't even know where she learned this. It worked. It's amazing. So this was really fun.
And she's a great mother-in-law.
And she's a great mother-in-law. She is. She's so patient with those grandchildren of ours. In the stage of withdrawal, we need to keep making bids for connection. We need to keep responding to each other's bids for connection instead of just ignoring each other and pulling out. And we need to focus on self-awareness and changing ourselves. What can I be doing differently here? And finally, in the stage of acceptance and renewal, I had a client once who had a child who left his faith, and it was heartbreaking for my client. It was just so sad for him to see this. And for 9 months, every single Sunday, he fasted for 24 hours in prayer for his son, worrying and worrying and worrying. And after a 9-month period, the first of the year came around, and he was planning sort of his New Year's resolutions, and he was thinking, I fast every week for my son, and I pray for him. And the Spirit spoke to him and said in simple words, and I've never forgotten them because they were so impactful for me, it's time to stop mourning the son you lost, and time to start rejoicing in the son you have. That was a powerful message for him. That God fully understood his sorrow and his mourning, but that it was time to move on and start seeing the good in his son and not just the problems. I have come back to that message again and again in my life. What's it time to stop mourning about and start seeing the good, the beauty, the sweetness in our relationships and in life?
So here's the goal. We want to help you bring God into your faith work journey. Here's the challenge. Life is tough. We give a test. I should have confessed up front, even though it's being videotaped. Those 9 items on the test are somewhat personal. We have done all 9 of those at one point in our lives. Navigate paradox. That's the message. So what does that mean, and how do you do it? Number 1, relationships. I'm a CEO. How do I manage between these guardrails? Hire people not like me. If I hire people like me, it's not going to help. Bring in people and work those 4 stages of a relationship so that I can navigate the inherent tension in any relationship. Navigate paradox through relationships. Number 2, navigate paradox through expectations. Did anyone study economics? Do we have any economists in the room? Oh, cool. What school did you study economics at? University of Toronto, eh? That A was supposed to make you feel warm and comfortable. Rotterdam School, great school. I was in Toronto this week. In economics, they teach everything worth doing is worth doing well. You maximize every decision. Along came a man named Herbert Simon, and he won a Nobel Prize in economics. You satisfice, F-I-C-E. Not everything worth doing is worth doing well. As a CEO, there are too many demands on your energy and time. The men and women here who run companies, you cannot do it all equally well. And Simon says to get, that's cool, Simon says, raise your hands. No, Simon says to get out of that tension, satisfy some things. What does that mean? Did anyone grow up with their mother, probably more than father, teaching them how to make a bed? Oh, can you do the sheets, the corners, the double flip on the pillow? Some of you are looking at your spouse going, yeah, you still do that. How many of us satisfice? We don't make our bed perfectly. Wendy and I sometimes get up in the morning, we look at the covers and we say, we'll be back. Give us 15 or 16 hours, we're going to return. And we just throw them up and we leave. When my mom comes to visit, we can optimize. Oh, I've trained my son well. No, you haven't. I satisfice my bed. I satisfice my lawn. I satisfice closing cupboards. I don't know if you've noticed that.
I've noticed that, yes.
I don't always close cupboards. I even satisfice printing my own slides. They have typos in it. But I optimize a few things. That's how I manage my guardrails. Some things are good is good enough. Not everything worth doing is worth doing well. Some things are so important to do, they're worth doing poorly. I don't miss my morning relationship with God. I love the comment that was made. Am I asking God who I can serve today? I don't think I've missed that question in 10 years. Why? Because it's worth doing well. When we manage this tension, how do we manage these inherent paradoxes? And one of the things we find as leaders is called serial equity. Right now, not everything's in balance. Sometimes I got to sacrifice A to do B. So where do I prioritize today? Manage those expectations. Tip number 1, build relationships. Tip number 2, manage expectations. Tip number 3, deal with these administrative details. And I'm going to ask you to yell out some in just a minute. Here's some we've done. Manage my calendar. Block out on my calendar time to do the things I need to do. Block out on my calendar time with my children, my spouse. 2 weeks ago, we blocked out a day to take our grandchildren to a petting zoo. It was probably not the most intellectually stimulating time. The cows pooped, the goats stank, and the grandchildren were wonderful, especially when we bought a McDonald's and their parents didn't like that. Stay in touch with people. Stay in touch with people. Shannon, where's Shannon? Thank you. Every time we've sent you a note, you've responded beautifully. Thank you for your diligence, for your faith. Greg, thank you. We've been able to stay in touch with you in different ways, by phone, by email, by FaceTime. By the way, don't do FaceTime early in the morning. That's not a good idea. Be accessible. When someone needs you, be there. One of the leaders I coached, he had a special phone number for his 3 sons and his wife. When that phone rings, I stop. I, by the way, tried that with our daughters, and the phone rang in the middle of a talk, and I took a minute to do a group exercise. I picked it up, and they said, Dad, we're remodeling a house. We don't know what kind of toilet to buy. And I said, let me be honest, that's not interrupt-worthy. But be accessible to those we love. Take time out, shut down, use resources. Okay, very quickly, we got 1 minute. What's another good idea? What have you done to manage these inherent paradoxes? Say no. Good. What else? Good idea. I'm not going to say no, it's a bad idea, because that would be saying no to no. What else have you done? Real quick. I hope, by the way, you can circle one of these and just, here's something I could do as a leader. Say no. What else? Delegate. Here's a key to delegation. Delegation is not what we don't do, it's what we have to do. I've coached hundreds of leaders. I delegate. No, it's not about delegation. What can you personally not delegate? Well, these 3 things. Good, do them. Stop everything else. What's another idea? Listen. Stop. Look at somebody. Slowly nod your head as if you're paying attention. Thank you for making us feel that way. Listen, not for the words, but for the why. What's another idea? How do you navigate these tensions?
wait.
What do you mean by wait?
Things just work out.
You know, I think we're not running 100-yard dashes. We're running marathons. And I think sometimes it's just patience. How many have had something bad happen in their lives? We all have. You shared some of that last night with your conversion story. Thank you. What a great story. I was touched by your experience. Be patient. Wait. God's time is not always 24 hours. Nice. One other idea. What was that? Boy. If you were trying to get 15 minutes with the president of Germany or America or London, the prime minister, could you get it? No. How easy is it to get 15 minutes a day with the creator of the universe? I love what you're saying. And prayer has different means at different times. It may be lying in bed, it may be driving in a car, but it's inviting God to be part of our journey. We have a challenge. How does God join my journey? Navigate paradox. 4 tips. Relationships, key. Expectations, satisfies. Serial equity, key. Number 3, do the administrative things of life.
Where's the little thingy? Oh.
You're doing the 4th one.
Okay.
Oh, okay. By the way, that was supposed to be funny. It didn't come across that way. So
I'm going to talk for a second about a concluding paradox. Oh, was there a 4th one I'm supposed to go back to?
No, that's the 4th one.
This is the 4th one. Okay, just so I'm clear. A concluding paradox. The first scripture there from Isaiah is a kind of a tough one, isn't it? Unless you're in occupation to a foreign country that has taken over yours, and you are struggling as a result. And then you find yourself sort of looking for a God who will repay fury to his adversaries, recompense to his enemies, and lift up a standard against them. This is what the Jews were looking for at the time of the Messiah's coming. This is what they wanted from him. Someone who would redeem them from their enemies, who would kick back the people who had them bound and push them away. And when Christ came with his message of peace that was not as the world knoweth peace, not as the world giveth peace, a different kind of peace that wasn't about freedom from your enemies or your circumstances, but that was internal, they didn't know what to do with it. I used to read those scriptures and think, how could they have missed him? How could they have missed this healer, this teacher, this savior? And yet this is not what they were looking for, is it? It hit me one day, how am I missing him? Because I'm looking for him also to fix the circumstances of my life, to solve my problems for me, to turn back my personal enemies, instead of looking for the ways that in the circumstances I'm in, he helps me find ways to cope and to find peace. I don't know if this is completely relevant to this particular question, but I've asked people many times, I've heard people many times say things like, I could be so much more effective in God's service if it weren't for, what's on the list? My headaches, my cancer, my child who's in trouble, my business problems and challenges, the struggles that I'm having in my life with my health or my parents or my children or my employees or my employer. We look for him to sort of take those circumstances away. But as Michael reminded us last night by his pounding on the steering wheel, sometimes the solutions don't come because God changes the circumstances, but because he changes us. I had an interesting experience with this years ago with my son, who was about 7 or 8 at the time, and he was a big boy. I can silence any discussion that women like to have about miserable pregnancies and deliveries by telling you that I had a natural childbirth of a 13-pound child. This was my son, who is now 6'7" and has a wingspan of about 7'3", and he was just a big boy with big shoulders and a big head, and it was tough. But he was big all the way along, and so he'd get into fights with his sisters, and he would just haul off and hit them. And we'd tried everything, we'd tried all the psychologically appropriate things you're supposed to do of timeouts and conversations and maybe punishment of some kind, you don't get to watch TV or whatever, and rewards and stickers and nothing. We just were getting no place with him. And I finally went to a colleague of mine at work, I'm a psychologist, and explained the situation. So what do I do with this kid? I don't know what to do. This is just really a struggle for me. I would be we'd be so much happier in our home if my son would just straighten up and stop hitting his big sisters, who he was bigger than by the time he was 2, And my colleague, a good Christian man, said, well, how did he learn to hit? I said, I don't know. We don't hit our kids, And he said, well, did you spank him when he was little? Maybe once or twice, yes. But we don't, that hasn't happened since he was probably 3. I don't think he even remembers being spanked. And he said, well, it sounds to me like that's the problem. I said, well, what am I supposed to do now? You don't spank him anymore. He said, well, I guess you better apologize. I said, apologize? Yeah, I guess I better apologize. And I thought about it, and I thought, yeah, that would be my value system. That's what I believe that you're supposed to do when you've messed up. So I went in one night to my son, and I tucking him in at night. I said, Mike, can I talk to you for a minute? He said, sure, Mom. I was a little nervous about this conversation, let me just tell you. But I knew what I believed I had been taught by the Spirit and by the scriptures that I should do, and by the examples of the people around me who were dear to me. So I said, Mike, by any chance, do you remember when you were a little boy that sometimes you got spanked? And I said it in about that way, and he said, yeah. Went from, yes, Mom, to, yeah, very quickly. And I said, well, how often do you remember getting spanked? Every day, he said. So much for he didn't remember. And I was really convicted. And I turned to him and I said, well, Mike, I want you to know, sweetie, that it wasn't every day, but that's not the point. The point is I was wrong, and I'm really sorry. That wasn't a good way to solve problems with you, and I should have found something better. I hope you'll forgive me. And he just sat there looking kind of morose, and I didn't know what to do, and I kind of said, well, if you want to talk about this again, we can, but thank you for listening to me. And I left the room thinking, oh man, I'm a terrible mother, and and I'm not trying to suggest there's never an appropriate time to spank a child, but apparently he'd gotten the wrong message, and it had happened too many times, even if it didn't happen every day. And so I just kind of let it go, not knowing what else to do. And it was really interesting because about 2 weeks later, there was a moment when he got mad at his sisters. He raised his hand like this, and he looked up at me, and he caught my eye. I didn't give him the stink eye. I just caught his eye. He put his hand down. And as far as I know, from that day to this, my son has never hit a human being. I didn't have a problem with my circumstances. I had a problem with myself. I'm so grateful for a loving God who teaches us when we've got a problem what we can do to make it right. The interesting thing was sometime later, my son and I were driving home from a talk I'd given. He was playing basketball at the church, and I'd given a little talk, and he said, "How'd your talk go, Mom?" And I said, "Oh, it was really interesting. Somebody asked a question about forgiveness, and I remembered that time when I had to apologize to you for spanking you when you were little." He's about 15 at the time. He looked at me in the car, and he said, "You used to spank us when we were little?" I was like, "You don't remember this? This was like the traumatic experience of my life that I had to, you don't remember this?" And he said, "No, I don't remember this." It's really interesting. You can change time. You can turn back the clock and undo it in a particular way when this kind of thing happens. So, Christ is never, in all the things he's called in the scriptures, he's called a lot of things: the Son of God, the Redeemer, the Savior. He's never called the preventer, is he? Never called the preventer. He doesn't stop us from having the problems and the challenges that we face in this life. He fixes them and heals them and turns them to gold when we rely on him. What is your mission in life? It's probably not about some particular thing that's going to be your great contribution to the world. It's going to be about learning. It's going to be about character. It's going to be about contributing. So what did you hear? What did you learn? What will you do? How will you make sure you did it? As you navigate the paradoxes of your lives, invite the Lord into your work, into your family, into your life, and he will help us all to shape the things we need to be doing in a positive way. Thank you.